NBA fantasy basketball sleepers and breakout players to draft. Breakout candidates. Starting with some of the most obvious breakout candidates to draft this season. Number 1, Jordan Poole, Washington Wizards. Traded to a great fantasy situation from Golden State to Washington this summer. Now heading into this season with an exciting fresh start, I feel like Jordan Poole is expected to be the man and one of the Wizards' main offensive options. Poole only started around half the games in Golden State last year, and he actually averaged 20.4 points, just over 2.5 triples a game, along with 4.5 assists and 0.8 steals, and was actually a top 130 overall player in most standard leagues. But with more usage and playing time this year, it is very possible that Poole is going to set new career highs in points, triples, assists, and steals, and maybe even some more major fantasy categories. Cause I'm not gonna lie, 20.4 points and 2.6 triples per game won't be too hard for him to beat, especially if he is averaging closer to 34 or 35 minutes a night in Washington. But do be careful because his shooting percentage might be a bit rough, so perhaps he is a better player to target in points league than category leagues. But nonetheless, if all goes well, then Jordan Poole should have a really good chance to set new career highs across the board this year in Washington. Obvious candidate number 2, Anthony Edwards, Minnesota Timberwolves. Even though he is already pretty established as a top 20 to top 30 fantasy basketball guy, this season might be the season where he finally puts himself into the conversation as an elite fantasy basketball player. He averaged 24.6 points per game last year and was actually a top 25 scorer in the NBA. Offensively, we have seen him improve for 3 straight seasons, from averaging 19.3 points as a rookie to 24.6 last year. We have also seen his assists, rebounds, steals, and blocks improve for 3 straight seasons as well. And at only 22 years old, I think most of us can agree that the Ant-Man still has plenty of untapped potential. So to me, if he improves on his efficiencies, defense, and playmaking ability, then the stats tell us that Edwards has a shot to possibly average around 27 to 28 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, 5 assists, and around 1.5 steals a game. And if he's able to keep that stat line consistently, then who knows, he might actually have an outside shot to catapult himself into becoming a top 10 overall fantasy player in most standard leagues this year. If you want to mop the floor with every single other fantasy team in your league and annihilate everyone badly every single week, all you have to do is just subscribe. Trust me and do it within the next 3 seconds. I wouldn't risk it. Next tier, the little less obvious breakout candidates. Walker Kessler, Utah Jazz. Now, Walker Kessler actually had a pretty promising rookie season, averaging 9.2 points per game, along with 8.4 rebounds, and was actually pretty elite in blocks at 2.8 per game. On top of that, he averaged an amazing 72% field goal percentage. So somewhat of a fantasy surprise last year despite being a rookie. He actually finished as a top 80 overall fantasy player in most standard category leagues. And this season, he is going to be the starting center for the Jazz, which pretty much means guaranteed playing time. If he's able to capitalize and build on last year, then let's say seeing him average 2 to 3 more points per game and maybe 2 to 3 more rebounds per game as well shouldn't be too hard for him, easily making him one of the more predictable double-double machines this year. I'm not gonna lie, he's not the most well-rounded fantasy player, but the stats tell us that he is an excellent guy to target for field goal percentage, rebounds, and blocks. In some ways, he reminds me of the next Rudy Gobert type of fantasy player for the next 5 to 7 years. Cause all Kessler really did was take over Rudy Gobert's spot in Utah. So in long-term keeper and dynasty leagues, I think right now might be the best time to hop on the Kessler train before he blows up even more in the next few seasons. Mark Williams, Charlotte Hornets. Another rookie that came out of nowhere late last year and actually finished the season as a top 50 overall fantasy player. In his last month of the season, he was averaging 13.8 points along with 11.2 rebounds and almost 1 block per game. Overall, he did end his rookie season averaging 9 points and 7.1 rebounds. But heading into this year, I think he might be a little bit too good to be considered a deep sleeper, which is why I have him in the little less obvious breakout candidate category. Depending on your league, many of the more knowledgeable managers might know about this guy, so perhaps the breakout category fits him the best. Williams is expected to have a big role on the Hornets front court and is likely their starting #1 center right out of camp. According to the pre-draft rankings I've saw, he's a very solid mid to semi-late round guy to go after for field goal percentage, blocks, and rebounds. And if he can bring his game to the next level, then no doubt he should be able to set new career highs, aka breakout, and return top 50 to top 70 value. Victor Wembanyama, San Antonio Spurs. Now, unlike prior years, I can't really make a video without talking about this guy, because many say he is the most hyped prospect to enter the NBA since LeBron. Meanwhile, other NBA fans think he is the most unique player to ever enter the NBA. And I kind of agree with that, because the dude is 7'4", but can also dribble, shoot, and move around the court quite well, which is kind of crazy if you really think about it. Fantasy wise, I usually stay far away from rookies as they are just too unreliable. For example, it took Giannis 4 years to become an NBA All-Star, while Steph Curry didn't really blow up until 25 or his 5th NBA season. But to keep things short, I think Wembanyama is gonna live up to the hype even in year 1. He might not be a top 10 or top 15 fantasy player right away this season, but if I had to guess, I would say top 50 or even top 40 might be possible. Obviously, there is really not much to go on right now, but the first overall pick in 2022, Paolo Banchero of the Orlando Magic, came in as a rookie and comfortably averaged 20 points and was actually a top 80 fantasy player, even though his pre-draft height was nowhere near what we're seeing with Wemba. Another example is Cade Cunningham, the 2021 first overall pick who averaged 17.4 points, 5.6 assists as a rookie, and was a top 70 fantasy player as a first-year player. Now, based on potential and hype alone, it sounds like Wemba's potential is ahead of both Banchero and Cunningham. So let's say if he doesn't flop badly, then I think most of us can agree that he's going to put up better fantasy rookie numbers than those two I mentioned earlier. I don't know exactly what stat line he is going to put up, but in dynasty drafts, I would definitely use a top 5 pick or even top 10 pick on him. Even if he doesn't pan out, I think his name alone will make him a pretty easy guy to trade, especially in his first few seasons. While for redraft leagues, it sounds like his height alone should get him good to great numbers in blocks and rebounds. For comparison, Porzingis is a little bit shorter, standing at 7'3", and as a rookie, he averaged 7.3 rebounds. So if Wemba is a better rebounder than him, then I think averaging 8 to 9 rebounds might not be that hard for him. But do be careful that the Spurs are going to be safe with Wemba and are likely going to manage his minutes. So expect some challenges along the way, especially with his field goal percentage. And with no sample size in the NBA, the best I can say is that he is going to be a decent rookie to go after for rebounds, blocks, and possibly scoring, but might be a punt guy for assists and field goal percentage in his first season. Moving on to the most important part of the video, sleepers and deep sleepers, aka where a lot of leagues are won, so you don't want to miss this part. Bruce Brown, Indiana Pacers. Now, Brown was a pretty reliable role player in standard leagues last season despite playing on a pretty stacked Denver Nuggets team. He set new career highs averaging 11.5 points, 4.1 rebounds, 3.1 assists, 1.1 steal, and 0.6 blocks. Overall, not crazy stats, but pretty well-rounded in 5 categories. We can't forget that Brown got paid this summer and is now expected to have a bigger role with the Indiana Pacers. With possibly more minutes usage and not having to share the floor with someone like Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., or Aaron Gordon, then who knows, Brown has a legit shot to maybe take off and set new career highs in pretty much every major fantasy category, which could make him a pretty good sleeper to target, because likely available in later rounds of most drafts, possibly around the 9 to 11 range. I think he is pretty safe to go after if you want a proven player just entering his prime, with a good opportunity to break out in a starting role. Staying with the Indiana Pacers, Obi Toppin, another player who I think could benefit from a change of scenery. Toppin was barely playing with the New York Knicks only averaging 14.7 points per game during his time there. But now he has a wonderful opportunity to be a key rotational player on the Pacers. And who knows, if he does well, he might even see starting minutes as the team's main power forward throughout the year. Perhaps seeing closer to 25 minutes a night. I feel like he's gonna get a chance to smash his career averages, which is pretty low right now. Only 7 points, 3 rebounds, and 1 assist. For some perspective, Toppin's per 36 minute stats sees him averaging 17 points per game, along with 7.2 rebounds and 2.1 assists. Even if we are a little bit more conservative and see him as a 15-point guy along with 5 rebounds, I'm going to say that his upside might not be super high, but he is still going to make a difference for your teams in more competitive and deeper leagues. So overall, I see him as another deep sleeper with potential to definitely outplay his draft position and possibly finish the season as a top 120 fantasy player. Grant Williams, Dallas Mavericks. Grant Williams signed a nice deal with the Mavs this summer and is expected to probably be the starting power forward on their roster. He averaged 8.1 points, 4.6 rebounds, and 1.7 assists. But heading into this year in Dallas, Williams will likely see an increased role and minutes. This should give him a good opportunity to have a breakout year, because honestly, like the others I've mentioned on this list, his averages won't be hard to beat. He probably won't blow up to be a top 50 fantasy player for you, as his ceiling isn't particularly high, but overall I see him more as kind of like a Dorian Finney-Smith 2.0 type of fantasy player in Dallas. And to be honest, he is kind of taking over that role, so he might actually produce a very similar stat line, playing a more complementary role behind Luka and Kyrie. Let's say he's able to bump up his blocks and steal count to closer to 1 per game and give you around 10 to 12 points and 5 rebounds, then I think he might actually be a pretty good player to use a late round pick on or pick up on waivers very early in the season. Terry Eason, Houston Rockets. Eason finished his rookie year averaging 9.3 points, 6 rebounds, 1.1 assists, 1.2 steals, 0.6 blocks, and 0.7 triples. I'm not gonna lie, but overall those are pretty well-rounded stats, considering how he only averaged just 21.6 minutes per game. As a starter, he was averaging 13.6 points, 9.8 boards, and 1.8 steals, while shooting around 51% from the field. Very small sample size, but the stats tells us that he is one of those sneaky players who can stuff the stat sheet if he is given the opportunity to eat. Unfortunately, that didn't really happen under coach Steven Silas. Heading into this season, it will be interesting to see if he can earn more trust from new coach Udoka. If they can get off on the right foot and Eason finds a way to stick into the starting lineup playing meaningful minutes, then he has potential to be one of the biggest sleepers in fantasy basketball in my opinion. Eason might be one of those sneaky deep sleepers that pop off out of nowhere and make you look very smart using a pick on him on draft day. Jalen Duren, Detroit Pistons. Heading into this season, Duren looks like the Pistons starting center and their most important big in their starting lineup. Last season, he averaged 9.1 points, 8.9 rebounds, 0.7 steals, 0.9 blocks, and 65% field goal percentage in only 24.9 minutes per game as a rookie. So overall, pretty good stats if you ask me. He was ranked about top 120 to top 130 in most leagues last year. So in terms of centers, he's not a top tier caliber center who might actually get overlooked by a lot of managers in drafts, especially early on. But in my opinion, Duren has to flop pretty hard not to break out or outplay his ranking from last year. Fantasy-wise, there's too much going in his favor, and he looks like one of the best young centers to target with upside for rebounds, field goal percentage, and blocks. I wouldn't be surprised to see him as a double-double machine this year and one of the best players to go after for those big man stats. Personally, I think it will be a huge disappointment if Duren doesn't finish this season as a top 80 to top 85 player. But if he somehow slips and if you can get him with one of your later picks, then I think he could be a huge steal. Russell Westbrook, LA Clippers. Now just hear me out on this one here. Yes, this is not 2016-17 anymore. And Russell Westbrook is no longer a top 10 or top 20 fantasy player. I get that he is a crappy shooter and sometimes a horrible turnover machine. But heading into this year, Russell Westbrook could still turn out to be one of the better deep sleepers to target with a very late pick. Because after joining the Clippers the last 2 months of last season, he was actually a top 75 overall fantasy player in most standard leagues, averaging around 16.5 points a game, 5.4 rebounds, 7.6 assists, and just over 1 steal. Overall, pretty solid stats for a guy who many have stayed away from in fantasy basketball for a few years now. Especially if you play in deeper and more competitive leagues, I'm not sure if you can find a guy with starting minutes that can put up that sort of stat line. And despite being almost 35, it is crazy how he is still one of the most durable fantasy players out there. Played a total of 73 games last year with the Lakers and Clippers, and 73 and 78 the 2 seasons before that. Now, if you look at the Clippers roster, they're not the deepest team in the world. If they don't get another major ball-dominant player like James Harden, then who knows, Westbrook's fantasy game might be very relevant. From afar, it looks like he is expected to start or play a major role on the team's backcourt, and is probably going to be the team's main ball handler for most of the time he is on the floor. And honestly, it looks like the Clippers might have actually brought him back for cheap to give guys like Kawhi Leonard and Paul George even more time off on load management. So on nights when Kawhi and PG don't play, Russell could be that guy who keeps the ship running and gives you a solid triple-double line, and even occasionally drop those crazy 30-point games, which we saw he did late last season. And to be quite honest, having him on your team might actually give you that extra edge to put your team on top. Now, don't waste a pick or blow your budget in auctions on Westbrook, but he might be a very solid, proven late round pick guy to gamble on. Cam Johnson, Brooklyn Nets. Traded to Brooklyn mid-season last year, he actually did pretty well, averaging 16.6 points per game, 4.8 rebounds, 2.1 assists, and 1.4 steals. Shooting around 47% from the field and 37% from three-point line, along with 85%, his shooting shouldn't be a problem. Now heading into this year, he is expected to have a major role on the Nets rotation. Likely the second or 2B option behind Mikal Bridges and Spencer Dinwiddie. Cam Johnson was actually a top 75 player in the 25 games he did play for the Nets last year, so there is no reason that he can't do that again. Because not many players in the NBA have a better chance to break out than someone like Cam Johnson in Brooklyn. And if he has a coming out party like Mikal Bridges did last year, then he could be one of the biggest fantasy risers and best sleepers to target heading into this season. So definitely don't sleep on Cam Johnson of the Brooklyn Nets. Do you agree with everything I said in this video? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to watch more of my crappy videos, then subscribe.